Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Talk Conversation Series, a peer knowledge resource by the CXOs for the CXOs. Now to our host, Kanika Goswami.
We welcome you to a podcast on stage with enterprise thought leaders. My name is Kanika Goswami and I'm the managing editor of On.Media's 6 B2B enterprise technology publications. We have engaging conversations with global thought leaders and industry experts, which reach over 1.3 million business leaders worldwide. Today we have with us Jimmy Mesta. He's a co-founder and CTO of KSOC. Hi, Jimmy. Welcome to our conversation to the podcast today.
Hey, Kanika. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure. We're looking forward to a very interesting conversation, security being the top of everybody's minds at this point in time. So this is just the right time to have this conversation, especially going into 2024. So I've just a few lines for, by way of introduction to Jimmy. Jimmy Mesta is the CTO and co-founder of KSOC, as I already said. He's a cloud-native security expert focused on building real-time Kubernetes security products. He's a veteran at engineering and an engineering leader who's held senior positions at companies which include Signal Sciences, which has been acquired by Fastly, and Invoca. Jimmy's created and he maintains the OWASP Top 10 for Kubernetes and has presented a global conference including KubeCon, RSA, CactusCon, and AppSec USA. So that's quite a mouthful, Jimmy. A little bit about KSOC, if you would like to share with us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for tuning in if you're listening. And I started my journey 15, 16 years ago in security. And as I kind of progressed through pen testing and leading security teams, compliance, this technology called Kubernetes fell on my lap a long time ago. And it kind of changed the game for how I thought about the SDLC in general, how to secure modern infrastructure. And through that time, just with lots of research and trial and error, just discovered that we were missing a lot of the security controls and observability and guardrails that we had in legacy cloud environments inside of Kubernetes, and decided to start a company around it after kind of years of working with customers. And KSOC was born to address all of those problems. So Kubernetes being at our core, but we do expand into other cloud native technologies, public cloud. Kubernetes is just at the nucleus of what we attack from a detection and response standpoint, misconfiguration standpoint, and we have a product offering that addresses the top concerns for security teams today.
That's interesting because that was also the first question I was planning to ask you. How does Kubernetes help in fighting the emerging threats, especially due to the fast innovations that are happening today, given the advent of AI and so many other tools that organizations have? The threats and the risks have also gone up. So how does this particular product that you work with help companies keep themselves safe?
Yeah, two sides of that question, right? Because Kubernetes itself, if you give the high level overview, it's a container orchestrator. This day and age, it's pretty much a data center inside of your data center. It's kind of how we like to describe it. So, you talk about your overarching public cloud, we'll pick on AWS, and then within AWS, you're going to have likely one or more Kubernetes clusters. And that is where your workloads live, your configuration, secrets management, network controls, access controls. And Kubernetes itself isn't secure or insecure. It's just what you make of it as, you build out your infrastructure. So the project that is Kubernetes has a lot to offer actually out of the box from a security standpoint, but it's up to you to make sure every flag is turned on. The containers are configured in a way that are least privilege access, and we have a lot of batteries included sort of options to make Kubernetes secure, but the reality is that it's not really working out that way. So the rapid growth, I would say the last 2 years even has just seen exponential growth in the number of clusters and nodes and really, really critical workloads running in this sort of environment, mixed with maybe a less domain expertise on the security side than we really need. That and it's complex. It just makes for kind of a recipe for disaster, if you will, as we keep scaling something out that doesn't have the repeatable security patterns that we've had in the past. So Kubernetes can be used in a very isolated, secure, observed way, but that's just not what we're seeing today, given the state of the industry and how fast this project's moving.
So that begs another answer then. How do you then make sure that it is helping organizations?
Yeah. So, step one is kind of at the ground level, you want to do some in-house education if you have a security team. If you're doing threat modeling, if you're work with your infrastructure and ops teams and DevOps teams to understand how, what is the plan for getting code ultimately that developers are writing, through the pipeline and then into a runtime state. There's a lot of complexity there oftentimes, and then really building guardrails. So from day one, our kind of thesis is you should always kind of get a lay of the land. Asset inventory from a security perspective is hard. We don't have it figured out yet. Like we don't even know always where our endpoints are, yet alone individual containers and nodes and clusters and all the components that build Kubernetes. So figuring out where your clusters are, who has access to them, right? At KSOC, we take a very identity-centric approach. And that's super important because at the end of the day, humans access Kubernetes. Service accounts also have the ability to talk to Kubernetes. And that's dangerous, right? So we want to make sure we are always doing an inventory of the cluster components, but also the identity components. And then where are your logs headed, right? Do you have logging set up? Are you doing anything with those logs? How are your container or workload configurations configured, right? Are developers able to deploy workloads that are, completely unprotected? Like are they privileged? Do they run as root? Do they have no networking controls? Do you have third-party components running in the cluster that could be risky, right? Supply chain matters still inside of Kubernetes. So all of those things really come to building an actual top-down plan for Kubernetes security and taking this pretty seriously because we've decided collectively to run our most critical kind of business centric workloads in this environment. So it needs to be treated as such.
Yes, so criticality goes up as much. A little bit about identity access management. So how can businesses secure their identity access management? Do you think what is the best way to do it, especially under the current circumstances?
Yeah, identity is, we work with CISOs every day, and it's top of mind, right? It's a top three concern across the board, and for good reason. And I think that was the case before COVID, but now that everybody is accessing everything from all over the planet, Kubernetes included, identity becomes even more important. So when you think about identity and access management, or just entitlements in general, you have usually most organizations at any real size have some sort of single sign-on or identity provider that's going to onboard a new user that just started the company. They're going to get access to some SaaS applications, maybe some infrastructure. Your identity provider isn't. That's just going to be the gate to the door, right? When it comes to cloud infrastructure, it's not really going to give you everything you need to actually understand what a person or a service account's doing in the depths of like Kubernetes specifically, or even in your cloud. So really the first step at the ground level is inventory of identities, right? If you talk about IAM, well, what do I have today? And should I have it, right? So doing an analysis of your cloud IAM, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, and then Kubernetes, which doesn't really deal with users as much, but there's a lot of RBAC components inside that kind of bind users and give them access to things in the cluster. So basic 101 would be running an inventory. That's not enough, but it's a start. And then secondary to that would be, what are these identities doing, right? Do they have the proper entitlement management? Are we generating anomalies? Are people logging into things that they shouldn't be? Are there excessive denies? Are there suspicious logins? And then correlating that with the entitlement, right? The entitlement piece is maybe even more important, because it's one thing to say, Jimmy, here's your credential, you can log in, but what can I do? And when we talk about cloud IAM, that's very complicated. If anybody listening has dealt with AWS IAM, for example, it's not a straightforward kind of table that you can just glance at and feel good that you have it covered. So you need to have some tooling in place, and you need to start ingesting logs and taking those logs and joining them with the actual identities to see, is this the right level of privilege or entitlement that this individual user or service account should have? And that flows back into Kubernetes as well. So if you're doing that on an ongoing basis, right, this isn't a quarterly exercise, even though our compliance friends might be happy enough with a quarterly assessment of this. This has to be ongoing, continuous, and real time. If you're happy with that, then you can right size. If you notice that you've given 50 developers cluster admin inside of Kubernetes, but only 2 of them ever log in and they only do one thing, well, you should probably reassess that level of access and right size and, rinse and repeat. And then as you do that, you're building detections, right? Your detection engineering team gets involved to watch for anomalous behavior, right? Or impossible time travel. That's a phrase people like to say where, I logged in from, here in Arizona today, and then 2 hours later, I'm in India somewhere with you logging in, like something's not right. That's impossible. So those are the types of detections that the SOC or the detection engineering team will write and maintain and respond to when it comes to identity. So it's really like a very kind of zone defense approach, or like the classic security onion. You have to do all of it and continuously.
And I think that consistency is a very important factor there, because it is not a one-time job or, an occasional kind of a thing to deliver. Right.
Yep.
So, my next question is, what challenges do business leaders face in integrating Kubernetes into their security posture? And how can businesses overcome those bottlenecks? How would Kubernetes help to strengthen the security posture, if at all? So that's an opinion thing we want to know from you.
Yeah.
Does it? And if it does, then how? And if it doesn't, then what is to be done next?
Yeah. So business leaders, if we're talking about a large enterprise, and it's not always the case at a board meeting where the word Kubernetes is going to come up constantly, right? So the challenge we have today is really treating Kubernetes like we treat the rest of our cloud infrastructure. And I mean, I've personally been saying this for a long time, and the tide is shifting where we cannot treat a Kubernetes cluster as a line item in your kind of regular old scanning program that you used 10 years ago, because within that Kubernetes cluster, you could have a whole separate world, right? Where you have, a massive amount of risk that you are taking on, and you're kind of just rolling it up into something that's much too simple, that doesn't even scratch the surface. So I think business leaders, those who are listening, need to understand that Kubernetes is not a line item. I know it's an enterprise piece of infrastructure, right? We just got back from KubeCon in Chicago last week, and it's the real deal. We're this is not a side project. This is not a kind of, niche for fun sort of thing. This is a real enterprise piece of kit that it needs to be top of mind for CISOs, because it will come back to cause problems, right? And when it does cause problems, whether it's a breach, some whatever it may be, you don't want to be scrambling to understand how your Kubernetes environment exists.
Right.
So that's number one. And I can pause there. I have the rest of your answers as well.
So there are two more, but you can go on if you want to add to that question itself. It's fine. So
Okay.
what we are
Yeah.
essentially saying here is that it is not an afterthought. It has to be a part of the entire basic thing.
Yep. And the other challenge there is who owns it, right? We see this all the time. Like, it's
That
kind
is
of
the
this
question.
like, yeah, it's like not me. But then who is it, right? Is it the security engineering team? Is it compliance? Is it the platform team? Maybe. I think that is problematic, because if nobody owns up to Kubernetes security, then nothing gets done. And then, RBAC, right? It's just the same story over and over again, where we see over permissive users and service accounts, and just a severe lack of visibility into, really, really high criticality level of access, right? Like, some of these clusters have the crown jewels running inside of them. They have access to other, parts of your cloud, and it's really a good jump off point for an attacker. So we need to tighten up the identity component, the authorization component. And then where do I do it, right? There's a whole shift left, kind of like we spent the past 5 years like kind of preaching about shift left, and then now we're like, well, we're not doing anything at runtime, and then there's something in the middle in Kubernetes called a mission control. I think you have to do all of it these days. Like, you cannot do all of you can't run a security program from CI, right? And I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but like, that's not the complete picture. It's a part of it. It's an important part. You can catch things early, but there is a runtime component that cannot be replaced, right? So I think that balancing between pushing some of this back to the developer and then some to the incident responder, I think that's an internal decision that you need to discuss.
So in your opinion, when you're talking about ownership, there are two very broad categories here. Do you think the CIO should take complete ownership of it from the point of view of the developer and the IT infrastructure, or the CISO only from the point of view of security and vulnerability management or threat management? From your experience, who do you think would do a better job if they were given this tool?
Without throwing anybody under the bus, yeah, it's so there's a third player, right? And that's the CTO, because at the end of
Right.
the day, you are your cloud infrastructure, things that aren't just Kubernetes,
Hmm.
your AWS, Azure, GCP spend,
Correct.
even your data centers, whatever it may be, typically is kind of a CTO CIO combo.
Hmm.
The CISO uh, may or may not be the best, person to actually, have repeatable Kubernetes security guardrails in place. I think we have great tools for security teams to respond to incidents, but I think it's actually a cross-team effort. Like, truly one of the,
Correct.
some things are very clear cut, but I think that Kubernetes security crosses too many boundaries to not have other teams deeply involved. The CISO,
Hmm.
at least in our, at KSOC, we deal with CISOs mostly, right? Because you're still in that firefighting mode where it's like, I don't know what I have, like, help me get some telemetry, help me put guardrails in place. But there's rarely an instance where we engage with a full security team and they don't pull in the platform team, or they don't pull in even the IT team. So it's very like across domain sort of concern.
Safe answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, my next question to you is what are the best threat detection and mitigation technologies that businesses need on their tech stack today to minimize the risks today, tomorrow, and the trending, the upcoming risk in the next, 12 months or so, whatever you're foreseeing as the vulnerabilities happen.
Yeah. And individual technologies, that's difficult. With obviously, like we build a technology that I think is great to handle much of what we've talked about. But at the end of the day, it really isn't a single technology. It's really what are you doing to operationalize what you've chosen, right? There's a lot of great technology out there to do a lot of different things across your cloud stack, right? From a security standpoint, what we see more often is, people buy all sorts of stuff or roll out open source, but how do you extract meaningful insights from it that are high fidelity, flexible, can kind of be mapped to other business initiatives and ownership, like really operationalizing what those tools and technologies are providing is probably it is more important in my opinion than choosing just the technology, right? If you can do that and then you can fold in identity, again, the top three CISO concern, who's doing what, and you have high fidelity alerts and responses that are either automated or have really strong run books and playbooks internally, like you're in a better place than most organizations. So that's it's more of like probably choose less but do more with what you have sort of answer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because if you're not using the tools in the right manner, then having them itself is not too much of an advantage that it gives you.
Yeah.
So, last question is how can businesses secure their containers and their CI/CD pipelines? A little technology question, but you can definitely talk about it in terms of what CXOs should be doing, CIOs or CTOs or CSOs.
Yeah. The CI/CD ecosystem has had a moment in the past like year or two where I think it's kind of like Kubernetes where everyone's like, oh, we're running arbitrary code and machines and humans have access, service accounts have like we all of a sudden, I mean, not all of a sudden, a lot of people have been talking about this, but it's become more apparent that our CI/CD systems themselves are attack like paths and vectors, and they're great for internal or external kind of attacks, right? Because they do a lot, right? There's a classic joke of it's still true. It's like Jenkins is in every enterprise, but it has a built-in remote code execution as a service, right? Where we've been running these tools for years, sometimes in the basement of an office, and they can do a lot of damage across the enterprise. So securing your CI/CD pipeline, there's a lot of things you can do. It really comes. There's a whole top 10 from OWASP that discusses that. I won't go into detail, but most of it comes down to similar concerns of access control, hard-coded secrets, supply chain, and then the containers and workloads and configuration that flow through those pipelines and ultimately into Kubernetes. You can put a lot of guardrails and checks in place throughout CI/CD so you don't end up in this whack-a-mole situation where you have to go do everything 10 weeks after it's deployed. You want to catch the low-hanging fruit early. So those are things like checking for Kubernetes misconfigurations in your manifest, image scanning, shrinking your base images to something reasonable so you don't have to deal with a lot of vulnerabilities, static code analysis. There are a lot of things in that realm that you can do in CI upfront where, it's the cheapest place to do it. And then runtime, you always have the instrumentation, but you don't have to go back and fix something egregious. You've already caught it in CI. So I think that's an evolving space for it's a lot of interesting tools and projects, and even AI is starting to take over kind of CI and doing pull requests, and is AI generated code like going to be tested with the same rigor? That's a whole different discussion, but it's an interesting space. And there's a lot of security innovation happening there.
Right. Now, one thing which I'm asking you out of curiosity, we speak to a lot of security leaders and everybody has an opinion on that. What
Yep.
should we be ready for 2024? Now, there is AI, there is automation, there's a whole bunch of new risks coming. What do you think deserves the most attention as far as businesses are concerned that, they should be prepared for, ready for, in terms of technology, in terms of strategy, in terms of investments or budgeting? What do you think should be the thing to watch out for? Security.
Oh, this is like one of those top 10 predictions for the future blog posts. Yeah, it's
You
going to
can do just a
get,
couple, maybe two
yeah,
or
yeah.
three if you don't see 10. That's
I mean,
fine too.
yeah, I won't do 10. A theme which is newer is CISOs being held to a pretty high level of accountability, right? We've seen some incidents recently with the SEC and other government organizations, like diving into the details. Like there was a breach. The CISO said it was this state of security and it wasn't, and now you're in trouble in like a pretty big way. That's not like a slap on the wrist. So if that's the theme for next year, that sets the stage for really scrutinizing, putting like a fine tooth comb through your entire program that you're running. Right? There's no shortage of security programs that are, I would say, getting a C minus, right? Like that are at enterprises across the globe, and we need to overall just increase the security posture. And that means, scrutinizing, I'll pick on Kubernetes, but like, let's not delay that next year, right? Let's put the experts on it, your CI/CD pipeline. Let's do the audit. Let's put the controls in place. Let's document those controls, verify them. I would say next year we're going to just see more scrutiny from outside forces. We're only going to get more sophisticated from an attacker's perspective, right? I think we're already there. Kubernetes attacks are on the rise. Like you could go to our blog. This year has been insane for CVEs, like real nation state style attacks in Kubernetes. It's something that wasn't the year before. Like that was not the case the year before. And next year, we'll see more, just sophistication, just the same way that we're evolving into cloud native. The adversaries are also doing the same thing, right? Like they're sometimes better than most of the platform teams that we deal with. And that's scary. So we'll see more sophistication and just sprawl, right? Whether that's identity or just, containers or, it's just more. And more is not always our friend in security because you can't track it. So I'd say we're going to be in for an interesting 2024, just with those two power dynamics at play. More attacks, but also more real scrutiny, and then throw in less budget, right? Like that doesn't help with the issue where we, like we're not spending like crazy in security like it was 2 or 3 years ago. And those things are going to be challenging.
And that's what they have to be prepared for. And as you exactly rightly said, the smarter we are getting, the worse the security risk scenario is also getting. So I'm guessing, staying prepared and staying careful is probably the only way forward. So with that, I have to really thank you for your time, Jimmy. We had a very interesting conversation, and I hope people who are listening in enjoyed it, and the people who are going to listen to it on the site will also enjoy it. Thank you so much, Jimmy, for today.
Thanks, Kanika. Take care.
Thank you so much for being with us. Please do follow us on social media for regular updates and new content.